Over at BangTheBook.com, we are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of great stuff being posted over there. We got a lot of good content heading on into the conference championship weekend. We've got Danny Borges' NFL power ratings and model projected final scores. My NFL market report going up on Friday morning. We'll have daily NHL from Parker Michaels. No article on Friday. He's unavailable, got something going on, but he'll return again on Saturday. We'll have NBA and college basketball content as we go throughout the weekend as well. We got a UFC preview up for UFC 246. Keep an eye out for James Mazzola's golf previews, a good one this week for the American Express. Once we roll into Sunday, we'll have another tennis preview from Big Ten Watto. So a lot of good stuff going on over at the website. Make sure you check it all out. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. All right, so like I said, I'm going to have a grab bag segment of sorts here. A lot of different things to talk about. We'll start with some Major League Baseball stuff, roll into the NBA and college basketball, finish up in the NHL, and then we'll bring Brent on the show here to give you some thoughts for the odds report. All right, let's start with Major League Baseball here, and we'll take a look at this Astros scandal, the biggest story in Major League Baseball right now, and quite frankly, one of the biggest stories that we've seen in quite some time, maybe going back to something like the Mitchell Report, something like that, but this thing is far from over. Obviously, we've already seen some fallout with the Houston Astros. They fired general manager Jeff Luhnow, also manager A.J. Hinch. Boston follows suit, and they let go of Alex Cora. Maybe that was more of a mutual decision than anything, but still something that had to be done after, he was really thrown under the bus with that investigation. So the Astros trying to protect their own. Maybe it was Cora's idea. Maybe it was all about him. But the Astros really seem to be protecting their own there. So Cora, he was involved and certainly, deserved the outcome there, probably getting fired by the Red Sox. But the big one is, the Mets and Carlos Beltran. And Beltran was part of the Astros, was part of this whole thing that was going on here. Whether or not he had a lot to do with it remains to be seen. However, again, the Astros, kind of throwing some of the outsiders under the bus a little bit, and Beltran and the Mets deciding, it's probably better that we just go our separate ways. I would assume, and of course I'm recording this here on Thursday evening, so there may already be a new manager announcement by the time you hear this show, but I think Eduardo Perez does make a lot of sense. Former Major League hitting coach, obviously Major League player, a bilingual player as well. I think it would be a very good hire from the Mets if they decide to go that route. But this thing isn't over. And then on Thursday it comes out that, maybe Alex Bregman and Jose Altuve were wearing some sort of devices once word kind of got around that the trash can banging was the way that they were, relaying signs. The whole thing is a mess. And initially, it was basically, okay, we're not going to punish the on-field personnel. We're going to punish, the people that collaborated almost behind the scenes, so to speak, like a Cora, letting go of Hinch, letting go of Luhnow, Brandon Taubman, of course, the ban for him. Now, though, you may be running into a situation where you may have to actually punish the players that are on the field here for this. And this is really opening up such a Pandora's box because you've got a lot of ways that players try to gain competitive edges, whether it's doctoring the baseball a little bit, whether it's, the old school way of picking up signs with a runner on second, things of that sort. Ultimately here, the fact that they use technology to cheat is what is the biggest problem. If you're having signs stolen at second base, change up your sign sequence. If you're having signs stolen because someone's using a camera or somebody's using some sort of technology to relay the signs, that's altogether different. So whatever happens from this, hopefully the game winds up better on the other side. But this was a thing that was going on for quite some time. The players, didn't want to snitch, didn't want to have anybody sniffing up their own backsides with, what is your team doing? Or how do you know about this? Stuff like that. So we'll see what happens here. But I will say this. In retrospect, it makes Rob Manfred's decision to focus on pace of play and defensive shifts and all this other stuff that he had this crusade about. It makes it look even worse in retrospect because the integrity of your game was being compromised. And there was a lot of talk. There's been a lot of smoke about this, and obviously now more things are coming out here that people knew about this in baseball circles. Either Major League Baseball opted to ignore it or pretend that it wasn't a problem or something like that. But, given how long this has been going on, given that it's now happened with two franchises, with Cora going from the Astros to the Red Sox, I don't know how Major League Baseball didn't step in earlier than they did. Now you kind of wonder, obviously this did significant harm to players with their earning potential. Imagine being a pitcher in the American League West and facing Houston for, 9 or 10 games there at Minute Maid Park over the course of the season. You really do wonder how far-reaching this is going to be. Now, from a betting standpoint, of course, Astros games are going to be very interesting now because, they don't have Hinch, and I don't know how much of a tangible impact that actually makes, but you're going to have a lot of people out for retribution and revenge. And some pitchers are going to take it into their own hands in an old school way, start throwing at Astros hitters, start going up and in with fastballs, stuff like that. I'm curious to see what happens with the fallout here on the field in terms of games with the Astros, Red Sox, and Mets, all without managers about a month before spring training. And the Astros seem to be looking for kind of a bridge guy. They're sort of looking for somebody that has experience, can deal with all the questions that are going to be coming. So they look at guys like John Gibbons or Buck Showalter. These really aren't big analytics guys. So I don't know if they'll kind of be puppets and someone behind the scenes will be pulling the strings. But somebody like a Buck Showalter, I don't think that's a good fit for the Astros and what they do in terms of metrics and analytics. So that would be something that would really sour my opinion of the Astros, maybe by 2 or 3 games or so over the course of the season. The Red Sox and Mets are likely in much better shape because those two organizations aren't necessarily in shambles over this. And in particular, the Mets, I don't think it's going to be a problem one way or another. They've still got guys that they can look at, like a Hensley Mullins, who was hired as the bench coach, Eduardo Perez, who was reported to be the runner-up to Carlos Beltran. So I think the Mets are in fine shape. The Red Sox, with some of their cost-cutting measures, maybe that's a little bit more difficult of a job to take. But then the Astros job is very, very challenging. The Astros, you could almost liken it to something like an Ole Miss or a Baylor in college football, something like that. Obviously, sign stealing nowhere near what was going on at those two programs, but just in the sense that you're kind of looking for sort of a bridge type of guy, someone that can really rectify the image and the foundation of your organization, which is why they would look at some guys from the old guard. And, I don't know if that's the right decision from an on-field standpoint in terms of how the Astros will fare, but it is still very interesting to see how all of these dominoes will continue to fall. And like I said, maybe now we start talking about, player suspensions and actual punishments to these teams on the field because, initially it was thought that the Astros punishment was pretty light. They lose some draft picks. There could be a lot of potential value in lost draft picks. The $5 million fine was the most allowed by the MLB Constitution. So, that was more of a symbolic gesture than anything else. But then Luhnow and Hinch, Luhnow just gets replaced with some other very smart individual in that front office. So that's probably not that big of a deal. And Hinch, while I thought he was a very good manager in a lot of ways, very aggressive with his bullpen usage, a lot of managers are by and large interchangeable. So maybe now if we get some sort of tangible impact to the lineup and to the roster, we could see a much different type of outlook here for the Astros. So that should be very, very interesting to say the least. Now, Caesars Sportsbook posted some win totals here this week. William Hill has already had theirs up. PointsBet in New Jersey has had their MLB season win totals up as well. Working on the guide, going through, I'm doing all of my team introductions right now, sort of looking back at some of the advanced standings metrics like base runs, like third order win percentage, stuff like that. Looking at some of these managerial changes, kind of a recap of last season for a lot of these teams. Then I go through once a lot of the transactions are done, once a lot of personnel is set in place. Then I go through and write up the offense, defense, the intangibles, positives and negatives, stuff like that. Going to use the same format that we used last year. So a lot of these win totals in the 2,000 to 2,500 word range. I went 21-9 on the win totals in the guide last season based on the lines that were out there. when the guide was posted. That was posted, I believe, in late February, I want to say. So 21-9 last year, hoping for similar results here this year. But I do have a few win totals to throw out to you here that at first glance, without doing my significant deep dive into each of the 30 teams, just kind of look off a little bit to me. And I know I'm going to get people saying that I'm a homer and this and that. Everyone knows that's listened to the Bettor's Box, read my article, really paid any attention to anything I've done at Bang the Book or my Twitter account at Skating Tripods. I am an Indians fan, but the Indians at 86 wins is just too low. And this is sort of like what I talked about a lot throughout the week with regards to the NFL playoffs. Perception, the court of public opinion, these things kind of shape the narratives for these teams. And the optics of this offseason have been very bad for the Indians. They completed a Corey Kluber trade, and the primary piece that they got back was a reliever. So that's something that a lot of people are going to look at and say, well, what's going on here? Was that a salary dump? Is that some sort of, rebuilding type of position, something like that? No, it's not. It's not a rebuilding position at all. The biggest problem for the Indians is that they traded Corey Kluber a year late. And that's not even factoring in the injury. It's just factoring in that his spin rates were going down, his velocity was going down. There were a lot of things that I was really worried about when it came to Corey Kluber. So I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the Indians making that move to trade him away. And I think, too, when you get a guy like Emmanuel Clase, who I think is going to be a very, very good pitcher for the Indians here, you get a bona fide back end of the rotation type of guy. And with Clase, it's one of those things where the Indians get a controlled player, a guy who won't reach free agency until 2026. It was a pretty good trade for them, especially when you consider the starting pitching depth that they have. And in particular, let's keep this in mind. With this season win total of 86 victories, the Indians won 93 games last year. Mike Clevenger missed 2 months with a bad back, still finished top 20 in Fangraphs' calculation of WAR if you reduce the sample size to 120 innings. Didn't qualify for the ERA title, but still, even with 120 innings, with FWAR, which is largely a counting stat, he was still a top 20 pitcher. Shane Bieber, top 20 pitcher. Aaron Savale got a long, extended look. Carlos Carrasco missed most of the season with leukemia treatment. He's expected to be back this year, and he's not that far removed from being a top 20 caliber pitcher. So the Indians' rotation is very, very strong. And I understand that their outfield looks a little bit questionable right now, but they still have 2 top 20 position players in terms of FWAR in Francisco Lindor and Jose Ramirez. Lindor's sprained ankle early on in spring training last year was never really healthy throughout the season. Jose Ramirez, he had his injury issues, broken hamate bone. And again, the Indians still won 93 games. And I understand the Twins are making moves. They got Josh Donaldson, a very good pickup for them. A lot of people like what the White Sox have done here this offseason. But the Indians are not some ruined team. They're not some 500 ball club now. They're not an 85-win team, in my opinion. They're probably a 90 to 95-win team without any upgrades to the current roster. So 86 is just too low. Again, the court of public opinion, very, very low on the Indians. But when you've got 2 top 20 starting pitchers and 2 top 20 position players that you can build around, you've got 38 games against the Royals and the Tigers. 86 is just too low for the Indians here. That probably will be one of my season win total over bets, depending on what happens with this number as we get closer to the release of the guide. But again, a lot of things went wrong for the Indians last year, and they still won 93 games. Another one I'm looking at here is the under for the Seattle Mariners. Their season win total 67.5. And look, I don't like taking very low win totals, because the margin for error is so small on those types of things. Last year was kind of an outlier for me, where one of my favorite ones was the Miami Marlins under 63.5. They came in quite a bit under that. But, about midway through the season, Miami was on pace to fall very close to that season win total number. Now, in the second half, they played a lot poorer, so they wound up coming in well underneath that season win total. But a lot of times, I don't like taking low win totals. This may be an exception for me. The Rangers did overachieve a little bit last season, but with Kluber, with Mike Minor and Lance Lynn back in the fold, I think they're better on the pitching side than they were last year. And Joey Gallo essentially missed 2/3 of the year last year with some different injuries. So, you've got a situation here where the Rangers are a better team. The Angels are a better team. They add Anthony Rendon. They still have the best player in baseball in Mike Trout. And last year, of course, for the Angels, the tragic death of Tyler Skaggs, injuries to guys like Andrew Heaney, they just didn't have pitching depth to begin with. Then they lose one, to Skaggs' death. They lose some to some injuries. And the Angels, they were in pretty decent shape heading on into late July from a win-loss standpoint, and then just kind of cratered in the last 2 months of the season. So that is a team that was on pace to be pretty close and maybe go over its win total last year. This year, their season win total bumped up quite a bit to 85.5 with the Rendon signing, with Joe Madden coming in. Now they think that there's a little bit more of a voice and a presence in the dugout there. The A's are still very good. Their season win total was finally adjusted up. I believe it's in the 87.5 range. And then the Astros, despite what's going on here with this team, unless some players are suspended for the first part of the season based on being part of this sign stealing master plan here, they're still a very good team. So the other 4 teams in the AL West, very clearly better than the Mariners in my estimation. And the Mariners last season, they started off 13-2 in their first 15 games. After that, in their last 147 games, 55-92. If you extrapolate that out to a 162-game season, that's a 61-win pace. So they were 11 games over 500 in their first 15 games at 13-2, played to a 61-win pace after that. Under 67.5, probably one that's going to be on my short list here as well. Finally, one more is the Cincinnati Reds, over 83.5. I really like this team. I really, really do. The lineup is steadily improving. Shingo Akiyama at the top of the order should be a pretty good addition, should translate well to Major League Baseball. A lot of talented young depth on the bench, and this rotation is very much improved. Full season of Trevor Bauer, Sonny Gray, Luis Castillo. Love Wade Miley at Great American Ballpark. Good defensive infield, a ground ball guy, heavy cutter usage. I really like that. Some good arms out there in the pen. Guys like Robert Stevenson are getting better. Guys like Jose De Leon, a former top prospect that ran into some injuries. He's got some upside to go along with Amir Garrett, Raisel Iglesias, Michael Lorenzen. And also the Reds made a big investment this offseason on the player development side with analytics, going all in with the metrics. I really love to buy on those types of teams. Remember, last year, there was a lot of steam for the Cincinnati Reds season win total over, and they underachieved to a degree over the course of the season. Usually, as a general rule, if you've got a team that gets a lot of helium the season before and underperforms expectations, they usually get to that level the following year. I think the Reds over 83.5, and quite frankly, I bet this one's already been bet up out there at Caesars with these season win totals coming out on Wednesday. I bet this one's already been bet up a little bit, but I do like the Reds here. I think the Reds are very, very capable of winning the Central Division here this season. The Cardinals not willing to spend. They've lost a little bit of their depth. The Brewers, a team that looks like they're going to kind of fall back a little bit. The Cubs were a massive disappointment last year. The Pirates, they're kind of in a state of transition. This division is there for the taking for the Reds. Even though their season win total down in this 83.5, 84 range, I do think this division is there for the taking for them, and I do like this team quite a bit here for this season. So again, getting that Major League Baseball guide out to you probably about 3 or 4 weeks from now. Looking forward to getting that published. Probably make the rounds out in Las Vegas, doing some cross-promotional stuff with our friends at Wager Talk and hopping on some different shows and podcasts. So a lot of baseball coming your way here in February and March. And I'll even probably look to do in the month of March those articles I did last year with some season-long betting tips, kind of looking at teams I'm going to want to look to back, teams I want to look to fade, over-under types of teams, things I'm going to look for on a game-by-game basis as opposed to a season-long basis. That's something I did last year to kind of shorten up the win totals a little bit. Probably will look to do that again here this year for the upcoming Major League Baseball season. Let's go through some NBA thoughts. I got some situational angles for us to take a look at here for this weekend, starting with on Saturday, The Cavs at the Bulls. The Cavs are ending a 6-game, 9-day road trip with a back-to-back. They play Memphis on Friday night, Chicago on Saturday night. And this is a trip that's had a couple of back-to-backs. They're playing a 4-6. They played out in Los Angeles for a couple of games. You got to dap it up with LeBron a little bit. Now they're playing the Bulls here in a back-to-back. It's a Saturday. They're going home after this game. I don't think we get much of an effort from the Cavaliers on Saturday night. Now, it is a back-to-back for the Bulls as well, but with the Cavs in a more difficult situation, playing that 4-6, that 6-9 off the West Coast trip, I don't think we get much of an effort from Cleveland at all here on Saturday night. So I do like the Bulls a little bit. Maybe the Bulls team total over, something like that. A pretty strong situational spot, I think, here on Saturday. Also on Saturday, the Suns at the Celtics. And I like this one quite a bit. This is the 11th game in 16 days for the Boston Celtics here on Saturday. And they've got the Lakers on deck. Los Angeles and LeBron in town on Monday. So the Celtics in a look-ahead spot with a lot of games in a very short number of days. The Suns finishing up a quick 3-game road trip. I like the Suns plus the points here. And I think you want to sprinkle a little bit on the money line in this situation as well. I think it's a very difficult spot for the Celtics, who maybe there's some load management considerations here as well with that game against the Lakers on deck. But 11 games in 16 days, a very heavy workload. I like the Suns on Saturday, a pretty decent look there. And then one more situational spot in the NBA for this weekend. And you can find my situational betting spots pieces every Sunday at BangTheBook.com. I write one for the NBA, for college basketball, and for the NHL as well. The Magic take on the Warriors here on Saturday. And I kind of wonder if you've got to hold your nose and take the Warriors here in this spot. The Magic are off of the Los Angeles double. That's always a difficult spot because not only are you playing two really good teams, and the Magic, of course, playing former head coach Frank Vogel in that game against the Lakers, but you've got nights off in Los Angeles. You know, these guys aren't going to go back to the hotel and just crash for the night. They're going to go out there, enjoy the nightlife a little bit. It can be a very tiring trip. And furthermore here for Orlando, they've got to come cross-country and play on the road in Charlotte on Monday in a division game. So I think Golden State in a pretty good spot here on Saturday. Again, it's very tough to back the Warriors in any context, but I think from a situational standpoint, the Warriors are a good look on Saturday, the Suns against the Celtics, and also the Bulls as they host the Cavaliers here on Saturday. Let's talk a couple of college basketball spots here I think are kind of interesting. Friday night, Dayton and St. Louis. This is a really interesting game to me because you've got Dayton off of a win against VCU. And for those that don't know, and I did preview this game over at BangTheBook.com here, Dayton was about an 8-point favorite in that one, did cover the number. Those two teams don't like each other. And that's a rivalry that has a lot more juice on the Dayton side of the ledger. That is an all-in type of game for Dayton, an all-in type of game for their fans. This could be a tricky spot here going out to St. Louis on Friday to take on the Billikens. Kind of a difficult type of game, I think, for a Dayton team that has played so well. Perception so high of this team, as we know. As we take a look here at a little bit of a look-ahead line, Dayton -7.5 or -8 here on the overnights as I'm recording on Thursday evening. I think that's a little bit too high. Now, maybe we do see Dayton take a little bit of money because they've played so well this year, but I think situationally, this is a little bit of a tough spot for the Flyers. So I think the Billikens +8, if you could find an 8.5 or 9, depending on which way this line moves, I think that could be a pretty decent look here on Friday night with the limited college basketball card. A couple of spots on Saturday to key in on here. Cal State Bakersfield out in the WAC. I mentioned this one on Monday's show. Also mentioned this in my article that Cal State Bakersfield is in a tough spot here. They'll be laying a number on the road against Chicago State. Chicago State, one of the worst teams in college basketball year in and year out. But tonight, on Thursday night, Cal State Bakersfield plays Kansas City. And that was a game that had a line with UMKC in the -2, -2.5 range. So a low line, again, recording this before that game is played, if that ends up being a pretty close game there, and Bakersfield puts a lot into that one, I think Saturday becomes a very tough spot for them. 2 games in 36 hours, a long way from home. Again, Chicago State is not good, but this is an early tip-off for the Roadrunners to have to contend with here after playing what could be a close game against UMKC. Chicago State may be worth it on Saturday. Again, they'll be getting a lot of points. It's a very tough bet to make, but situationally here, depending on what happens with this Thursday night game, that will be played a few hours after I'm recording this segment, that could be one where you kind of look at the Chicago State side in that whack matchup. One more here for Saturday, UTEP and UTSA. Again, another spot that I talked about on Monday's show with Kyle Hunter, and we'll have Kyle Hunter on after the weekend here for a full show on Monday once again. But UTEP wins in overtime at home against UTSA on Wednesday night. The Miners do not cover the -6 number. So now you wonder, what does this adjusted number look like at UTSA on Saturday? UTSA in El Paso on Wednesday night was up by 12 at halftime. They ran out of steam. UTEP tied the game, won it by 3 in overtime. Now what? Was that a situation for UTSA where maybe they got a little bit tired playing in the elevation of El Paso? I think that certainly could be a possibility. Do they exact revenge on their home floor? I think they do. Let's see what this line looks like. Again, that was UTEP -6 at home. You figure there's, as Greg Peterson mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the show, 3 points of home court advantage or so. So you flip home court advantage here, UTSA a pick'em, -1, something like that. That seems like something you may want to jump in on because, again, in the first half, they were clearly the better team there on Wednesday. So UTSA, one that's definitely on my radar here for Saturday night. So again, to recap those situational spots in college hoops there a little bit. St. Louis on Friday night, getting some plus points against Dayton. Chicago State getting plus a big number against Bakersfield on Saturday afternoon. And then this UTSA game here against UTEP could be a good spot to take the Roadrunners. A little bit of a lot of Roadrunners here on this show, but could be a good spot to take UTSA there, coming off of that tough loss to UTEP with revenge in a game where they did squander a pretty decent lead in that one. Finally, we take a look at the NHL here for this weekend, and we start with a couple of situational spots, and then I'll lay some heavier stuff on you here. The Penguins and the Red Wings. This one coming up on Friday night. And I think this might be a good spot to take the Red Wings. And that's very, very difficult because the Red Wings are just awful. The worst team in the NHL this season by a pretty large margin. But this is a tough spot for Pittsburgh. The Penguins playing Boston on Thursday night. Then they fly out to Detroit. Then they host Boston on Sunday in the NBC game. So a 12:30 puck drop there for that one. So this is a real challenging little spot here for Pittsburgh, I think. You're in a back-to-back with travel. It's a decent flight from Boston to Detroit. Weather will be a factor up in the Great Lakes area as well. So the Penguins may have some trouble getting out of town Friday night after the game on into Saturday. That will be a little bit of a consideration for them against a rested Red Wings team. Maybe if you don't like the Red Wings on the money line, and I can understand why, this could be a spot for one of those plus 1.5 puck line plays. We talked on Tuesday with Brian Blessing about the Kings and Lightning game. Kings with their dads on hand, Tampa Bay in a bad spot. The Kings plus 1.5 was -110, and I didn't play it. Took a small shot on that Kings money line looking for the upset special. But don't shy away from the plus 1.5s in really bad spots either, because it's tough to get margins some nights in the NFL, or in the NHL, excuse me. So that may be a spot where you want to look at Detroit plus the 1.5 there. If the price is right, you don't want to lay too much juice in a situation like that. But again, a very tough spot for the Penguins here. And those travel considerations getting out of town. Something important to point out here now that we're into the month of January, NHL, college basketball, NBA, whatever the daily winter sport is, travel headaches can be a problem. These guys are just like us. They don't want to sit on the tarmac. They don't want to sit in the airport. They don't want to have to dick around with a 3-hour layover, something like that. They don't want to have to do that. So when weather pops up, keep an eye on what the beat writers have to say. There have been times for NBA teams where they haven't gotten to the arena until 6 o'clock for a 7 o'clock game, something like that. These guys are creatures of habit, man. They want to eat at the same time. They want to practice at the same time. They want their travel to go off without a hitch. If the Penguins have some travel troubles getting out of Detroit on Friday night, that's very much a possibility with the weather system rolling through. Maybe they have a little bit of a hangover with that Sunday afternoon game. Or maybe they don't give a shit about this game against Detroit. They just want to get done with it, get to the airport, and get out of town. Well, maybe that reflects itself in the way that they play here. So again, we don't think of weather impacting these indoor sports, but it definitely can, particularly with the travel. So you've got to follow along on Twitter. Look at the beat writers. Look at what the local people have to say about these things. Those things can be a pretty good factor for you to find some additional situational spots as the week goes along. My favorite situational spot in the NHL this week here is on Friday night. The Lightning and the Jets. 7th game in 11 days for Tampa Bay. A back-to-back with travel coming off of playing Minnesota. You have to trust a spot like this. This is a very, very bad spot. One of the worst I've seen in the NHL so far this season. 7-11 with a back-to-back. Jets team that is a little bit more rested, obviously, than Tampa Bay. I think the Jets are a good look here on Friday night. Again, situational handicapping does make a lot of sense in the NHL, in the NBA, in college basketball. I've found that maybe there's not nearly as much value in it in the NFL and college football here this season, but I do think it still stands to reason that it works a lot in those daily winter sports. So there are some spots that I'm looking at here for this weekend. And finally, in the NHL, let's talk about this real quickly. Bye weeks are coming up. So essentially what's going to happen here is that some teams will have the bye week before the All-Star break, which starts next Thursday. Other teams will have the bye week after the All-Star break, which ends on Sunday. So you're going to have some very well-rested teams here coming out of the All-Star break, and then obviously in the games a few days after the All-Star break. Rust can be a factor with some of these teams, but here's what I wanted to point out. Anaheim and Tampa Bay, their final games before the All-Star break are on Friday. Teams done on Saturday that won't play again until at least the following Monday after the All-Star break. Arizona, Buffalo, Calgary, Detroit, Edmonton, Los Angeles, Montreal, New Jersey, Nashville, Ottawa, San Jose, St. Louis, Toronto, Vancouver, and Washington. So these are teams that won't play for at least a week, actually more than a week, after their final games here this weekend. The last thing that these teams want to do is sit on a loss for a week. Some of them do play head-to-head, but you've got to think with that bye week, a chance to travel with the family, a chance to just lay low, maybe go to the All-Star game. You should get some very big, very motivated efforts from these teams in their final games before the All-Star break. So again, that list of teams posted over in my situational betting article over at BangTheBook.com. Again, I don't think these teams want to sit on a loss for over a week if they can help it. So those are teams on Saturday that may have a little bit of extra jump, may have a little bit more incentive to win their respective games. So keep that in mind here for this weekend in the NHL.